Long ago, when I was a young man, it was customary for young Indians to go on small war parties, seeking out Shoshones or other hostile tribes. If our medicine was strong, we would sometimes return to camp with a scalp or a number of ponies. Sometimes an Indian would keep his best horse tied at the entrance of his teepee, holding the rope in his hand while he slept. It was considered a very brave act for an Indian to sneak into an enemy camp at night, cut the rope of a horse outside a teepee, and ride it away. I was 22 years old at the time of the famous fight on the Little Bighorn River. Though it happened long ago, my memory is clear, and I will share everything I know about that battle. We Arapahos were 5 in that fight. 3 have since joined the spirits of our ancestors, and now only Left Hand and I, Waterman, remain. Soon we too will pass into the long sleep, and no one will be left to tell the story. The Arapahos were camped at Fort Robinson, where they received their rations from the government. One day, 4 other young men and I slipped out of the agency to go on a scouting mission for Shoshones. Accompanying me were Yellow Eagle, Yellow Fly, Well-Knowing One, Sage, and Left Hand. We encountered a small Sioux tribe near the Little Bighorn River as we rode north into Buffalo Territory. They told us that the Sioux were planning a sun dance and invited us to join them at their village for a good time. These Sioux believed us to be spies for the white forces, I found out later. We rode along with them, and as we approached the village, many Sioux came out to meet us. They took all our guns and made us prisoners, accusing us of being scouts for the white man and threatening to kill us. That night we were guarded to prevent our escape. Early in the morning, Two Moon, the Cheyenne chief, learned that we were Arapahos. He went to the Sioux chiefs and convinced them to return our guns and set us free. Arapahos and Cheyennes have long been close, almost like brothers. Although the Sioux gave us back our guns, they kept a close watch on us so we couldn't get away. We stayed in the Sioux camp for 2 days. Then the entire village moved further down the river and set up another camp, the largest I had ever seen, with thousands of warriors. When the sun rose again, it was the day of the battle. We heard gunfire from the upper end of the village and rushed in that direction. The soldiers had crossed the river and were advancing toward the camp. By 9 a.m., it was roughly. With so many Sioux and Cheyennes, I knew they would be routed even though there weren't many soldiers. There was one Indian murdered. After retreating across the river, the men dug some holes on a ridge. For a considerable amount of time, the Indians kept firing at them. We ran down to the lower end of the town when we heard gunfire and concluded it must be another batch of soldiers. The Indians pushed these forces back when they attempted to cross the river and attack the camp. At that moment, as we crossed the river and drove the soldiers up the hill, they could have forded the river. When they reached the top, they abandoned their horses, which the Indians took. Some of the horses escaped and came down to the river, where they were caught by some of the Indians. There were gray horses and some sorrels. The Indians encircled the troops who were now on foot. The soldiers had taken position on high ground. During one of our initial charges, a Cheyenne chief named White Man Cripple, also known as Lame White Man, was killed. Subsequently, Two Moon assumed leadership over the Cheyennes and guided them during the conflict. At the beginning of the battle, I was with some Indians in a small gulch below the hill where the soldiers were positioned, but later we moved up the hill and closed in on them. There was a great deal of noise and confusion, with the air heavy with powder smoke and the Indians all yelling. The bravest person I had ever seen was Crazy Horse, the Sioux leader. Shouting to his troops, he rode closest to the army. Despite all the soldiers shooting at him, he was never hit. The Indians on horseback carried shields and rode on the sides of their horses, making it difficult for the soldiers to hit them. The soldiers were completely surrounded, with the entire area teeming with thousands of Indians. Some soldiers tried to escape to the river, but they were all killed. A few managed to reach the river, but were killed by Indians waiting there. The scene was chaotic, with Indians running around, shooting and yelling in excitement. I only know of one soldier I personally killed, which happened at the very end of the fight when we charged to the top of the hill and finished off the remaining soldiers. Although I murdered him with my gun, I did not scalp him because Arapahos only scalp males with long hair. When I got to the top of the hill, I saw Custer. He was on his hands and knees, covered head to toe in buckskin coat and leggings. There was blood dripping from his mouth after he was shot in the side. It looked like he was watching the Indians go by. There were 4 troops seated around him, but they were all seriously injured. The remaining men had already fallen. Then the Indians closed in around him, and I couldn't see any more. Most of the dead soldiers had been killed by arrows, as many had arrows sticking in them. Custer was dead, and several Indians were stealing his buckskin clothing when I saw him again. The Native Americans were fighting, each attempting to seize the other's clothing. I don't know who eventually got them. The fight was over by the time the sun was at this position, around 3 o'clock. The women then crossed the river and began stripping the dead soldiers. Sometimes a soldier who wasn't fully dead would move a little, and the women would get frightened and scatter. I don't know what the women did to the dead soldiers because I didn't go back to see. I don't know if Custer was scalped, but I witnessed a lot of soldiers get cut. After the battle, I crossed the river to return to camp. During the battle, I wore beaded leggings, a breechcloth, a white shirt, and a large war bonnet. My face was painted yellow and red, and around my neck, tied in a deerskin medicine bag, was a special root, which was my medicine. I still have that same medicine. The Sioux kept a close watch on us because during the fight, Left Hand had killed a Sioux warrior, thinking he was one of Custer's Crow or Arikara scouts, and the Sioux were very angry. The white people believe that many Indians were killed in this fight. However, I only know of 6 Cheyennes and 6 Sioux who were killed, though there were many wounded. We slept that night in the Sioux camp, but the following night, after dark, Yellow Eagle, Yellow Fly, Left Hand, and the well-knowing one, Sage, slid out from under our wiki-up side, mounted ponies, and secretly left the camp to ride back to Fort Robinson along the base of the mountains. A lot has changed since then, and it was a long time ago. The Indians who previously happily roamed these plains as government wards are now detained on reservations since the buffalo have all vanished. My people are extremely underprivileged and occasionally go without food. Just Left Hand and me, Waterman, the remaining Arapahos from the 5 who fought at the Battle of the Little Bighorn, survive. Now that we are older men, it will soon be our turn to join the big mystery. It is the reason I told you this story.